the one and only Mark Sleboda. Mark Sleboda is an international relations and security analyst and a good friend of this show. Mark, how you doing, man? You doing all right?
Jamarl, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
I am also alive. I'm still kicking. Still kicking. Mark, I have been fascinated by what has been taking place over the course of the last few days, especially in the last week. We apparently have had communications where there were talks in Riyadh. Those talks in Riyadh are apparently going to continue on Tuesday. What are they talking about? Like, what is the conversation that Russia and the United States are having? As I was telling my audience, if it's limited to the war, then Trump gets nothing out of it, which means by definition, there has to be a larger conversation of international relations that is taking place. What is happening in Riyadh? Because Europe is freaking out over these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear what was spoken about thus far at Riyadh and the conversations that have been going on, on the phone and around it. And that is not primarily the conflict in Ukraine. That was not the major thing. There weren't any, shall we say, negotiations over the conflict in Ukraine. That hasn't even started yet. The primary things that were talked about, and this was actually made pretty clear if you read past the hysterical headlines in even the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they're reporting on it. But the Russians said the same thing. The one of the Russian people that was there, Yuri Ushakov, who is Russia's top personal foreign policy advisor to Putin, right? So kind of roughly the equivalent of Mike Waltz there, right? The Russians sent 3 people in direct similitude, right? Parallels in position to the U.S. The U.S. sent Secretary of State Mark Rubio. The Russians sent Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, right? The Americans sent Mike Waltz. The Russians sent Putin's top foreign policy advisor, Yuri Ushakov. The Americans sent this businessman, Steve Witkoff, who is close to Trump. And the Russians sent a businessman, Kirill Dmitriev, who is the CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, right? So someone who can speak business, right? So very parallel. The main topic of conversation was simply the restoration of formal official diplomatic contacts between the United States and Russia, and the beginnings of a conversation on what are the obstacles to this dialogue, right? What because it's been 3 years since the US and Russia have talked. What are the obstacles? And one of the primary obstacles that the Russia has is, both sides have, is one of the things that has occurred in the last 3+ years is that both sides have reduced the staffing and activity of each other's embassies on their territory to a skeleton crew and a minimum, right? So the first thing, and also the Russians complain that the U.S. openly seized Russian diplomatic property, right? And that is something that in the coming months we may see restored to Russia. It's a possibility. That it hasn't been a direct statement to that effect yet, but they have made statements that they are beginning the process of restoring diplomatic relations and removing the obstacles to each other's diplomatic work, which would mean both sides are right now agreeing on will allow each other to increase the number of embassy staff, right? The people permitted in each other's countries, what they can do, where they can go, that sort of thing. So that is one of the primary things. They also set up a consultation groups to deal with annoyances, right? Essentially, or shall we say obstacles, right? To dialogue. So basically, it's a group that it aims to head off further diplomatic or further, political and geopolitical disagreements with each other, right as they emerge, and prevent them from escalating any further deterioration of a relation. So it's an ongoing consultation and contact group. Hey, we don't like that you did this. That is not helping the situation. That's the purpose of that there. And the third thing they did is they discussed the possibility of a Trump-Putin summit, right? What would be required for that. They have not come to any firm agreement yet, and that's obvious a week out from those talks, right? That is not set yet, but they've begun the discussions in that direction. And they have obviously, when it comes specifically to the conflict in Ukraine, they stated each other's blanket position. This is our opening position going in. This is the way we feel. This is our terms, right? This was said on both sides. And we're willing to talk with you about these things, right? Those talks haven't begun, right? They are going to begin. And the Russian side at least announced that the U.S. is going to appoint a head negotiator on their side. And once they know who the American head negotiator is, because the U.S. has initiated these negotiations, then Russia will assign someone whom they feel is at a same level and able to, do the same type of business. So that is really all that has happened so far, right? What the Europeans are so furious about is that Russia and the U.S. are talking again. That's it. That is because that hasn't happened for the last 3 years. And the view that the Biden administration and the Europeans have adopted is that diplomacy is not done for your enemies. Russia is our enemy. We don't talk to them, right?
Which makes no sense. That makes no sense.
Well, it flies in the face of what we have understood as diplomacy during the entirety of the Cold War, right?
Yes.
Bismarck, who is, probably the greatest historical diplomat of all times, right? Everything. Yes. But this comes from this messianic supremacist ideology of exceptionalism, right? We usually think of it as U.S. exceptionalism, right? Well, we also have a Western exceptionalism that, at least in comparison to this administration, the Europeans are far more ideologically wed to exceptionalism than the current U.S. administration is. And they believe that, therefore, because of this exceptionalism, that they are structurally, societally, and morally superior to everyone else, right? And they look at every potential disagreement with another country in this moral good, bad, Manichaean, black, white lights, and they assume that the other side is bad, is evil, right? Is Satan incarnate on the earth. And therefore, they don't talk to that person, right? Because talking to them would already be a concession. It would already be appeasement of evil, right? This is how puerile if you want to call it puerile. It's also, you could consider it like religious fanaticism, right?
It's childish. I'm sorry, it's childish. I mean, look, you can add all of these emancipatory words to it to try to cope. And I know you're not doing that in a positive sense.
No, I'm not. Yeah.
I'm just saying it is childish. It's like the notion that you are.
It is childish in the same way that the Inquisition was childish. Yes. It is a type of fundamentalism, right? It is a messianic worldview and ideology, and I think it's the most dangerous thing in the world today. It's slightly less dangerous because the U.S. has, to a significant degree, dropped it. It's not because the Trump administration doesn't have people that have a sense of U.S. exceptionalism. But that sense is dialed a little bit back, and Trump has obviously placed some degree of realism, pragmatism, and transactional relationships, at least on a par with it, right? It's been dialed back, right?
Yeah.
In Europe, that is absolutely not the case. They're furious that the U.S. has left this position and has engaged the Russians in dialogue. They view that as a betrayal. They talk about the end that Trump has given the concession already before negotiations begin of ending Russian isolationism. And you're like, have you been paying any attention to the last isolation? From who? From the West? The West isn't the world. Everyone else doesn't care, right? The only thing you've done is actually isolate yourselves,
right?
But you try to, they still live in delusional fantasy land. They have not emerged from delusional.
Speaking of them, Germany has Scholz has just had a humiliating outing in that election. It was understood that outing was most likely going to be humiliating. Merz, I believe, is the name of the person who took over. Friedrich Merz. Is it Frederick or Friedrich? The name, the German Austrian way of
Friedrich. Yeah, not Frederick.
Friedrich.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, Friedrich.
Merz, he won. He most likely will get the first crack.
He is the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, which is the party that Angela Merkel came from. It's the center-right party of Germany.
So I guess the question is, will that change German policy? I mean, AfD came in second place. There's a question of whether the Christian Democrats are going to form a government with AfD. They said that they're willing to do so.
Of course, they're not going to.
Exactly.
That's not a question. That is absolutely not a question. All the other parties of Germany have long sworn that they will never form a government.
They say that. They say
that, and it's the second largest party, and no one is still going to touch them. Right. Obviously, there is going to be another grand coalition government. Right. It will be the Christian Democratic Union, the now much reduced Social Democrats without Olaf Scholz, presumably.
So you think they're going to lock out
probably the Greens will have to be brought in again as well.
So you think they're going to lock out the AfD again?
Oh, of course they are. I mean, there was never any question of that. There was never any question. Just like they locked out Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party in France. Absolutely. That was never even a possibility that it would be otherwise.
How long can they do that? I mean, we're getting to the point where the AfD is nearly the number one party.
Decade.
You think it's going to be that long? Okay. Yeah. So what policy changes? I mean, obviously the public voted for something different.
Yeah.
Will Germany take a different tact on the war? With the
absolutely. That's the biggest difference.
And what would that difference be?
They're going to be a lot more hawkish.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
Are you serious?
I mean, Friedrich Merz has long said he wants to send German Taurus cruise missiles, which Olaf Scholz stood. That's the one strong position he actually had during his entire chancellorship, right? Is he refused Western and Kiev pressure to send the Taurus cruise missiles. Friedrich Merz said, more than a year ago that he wanted to send them, right? So that will obviously be sent. We can expect greater German support, military and financial support for the Kiev regime, but also political support, right? It's not just going to be Macron and Starmer anymore being the hawks, right? Defending now, as they see it, the Kiev regime from Trump and Russia, right? But it will be a trio because Merz will be joining them right alongside. He might even be taking a stronger, more leading position. The wishy-washy, liverwurst Germany of Olaf Scholz is gone, right? Where actually the foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, had more gumption, right? Yeah. I mean, she was a hawk herself, right? Yeah. But, that was the face of Olaf Scholz's government to the outside world. That's not going to be the case because Friedrich Merz is a much stronger personality than Olaf Scholz was. He's also a hawk on Ukraine. So Germany, that is one small celebration in Kiev today, is that Friedrich Merz will almost certainly increase both the political and the military and financial support for the Kiev regime. So they gained a little bit of a reprieve. Now, that's still not going to stand them well if the Trump tide, the Trump, obviously the tensions that are building between Trump's Washington and the Kiev regime continue. That won't make up for that. But they added another ally, another firmer. They replaced a weak ally with a firmer, more hawkish ally. So that's going to change the dynamics in Europe.
Macron and Starmer are apparently having a conversation with Trump. Yes. So European leaders are going into Kiev. I think it's the 4th year of the war.
Yeah. We just entered 3 years. We're now into the 4th year today.
Will they have any leeway in trying to pull Trump? I mean, they apparently want American air defense with being able to put European troops on the ground. This sounds outrageous. They're going to be targets the moment that they land. They would have to be targets the moment that they land. You can't have a camel's nose under the tent. But will they have any chance of swaying Trump with this plan?
I mean, that all depends on what happens behind closed doors with them, right? We don't know what's going on, what kind of threats and bluster and promises will be made on both sides. I think these, considering everything we've heard about the Trump administration, everything that the Trump administration has publicly said about Ukraine over the last week, 2 weeks. I mean, you can't forget the US president just called Zelensky a dictator, right? I believe it is largely accurate. And
it is.
There's not really much walk back from that, right? I mean, that is a huge narrative concession.
By the way, it's gotten worse. They called him a liar, especially on the minerals.
Essentially, they implied that he was a liar, yes.
Rubio,
Did he use the word liar?
Rubio effectively said it. And to make it even worse, Bloomberg pointed out that Zelensky did lie to Trump because they didn't have the mineral wealth that they said they actually had. I think it's like $500 billion.
No, I mean, the Trump administration knew that. I think the Trump
you knew that? You think they knew it going into it?
Oh, absolutely they knew. I mean, come on. You don't think that the U.S. intelligence community knows what the mineral wealth value of Ukraine is, right? I believe the Trump administration is playing a game. I believe they are actually putting enough dangling mines out there that to let Ukraine walk of their own accord in them, that will allow them to rhetorically and narratively separate themselves more and more from Ukraine. Look at this. He refused my deal, right? He owes us money, which he actually doesn't, right? Whatever you may think, the Biden administration was the last president, and they gave all of this money and weapons to Ukraine primarily as grants, right? They gave it. Now Trump comes in and starts talking about getting the mineral wealth, quote unquote, of Ukraine, right, as payment, not for future weapons, right, but for what the Biden administration already delivered. That is a mafia-style shakedown of epic proportions. Now, and they were demanding not just half of all the mineral wealth of Ukraine, but they were also demanding half of all profit from all ports and infrastructure in Ukraine. Like half of every hryvnia you make goes.
Oh, that's the document that Zelensky wouldn't sign, because the reporting is Zelensky refused to sign.
It was. I mean, he literally would have been selling his country as colonial serfdom to the United States, right? He's correct in that way, right? And the Trump administration knows that. They know that there's. I mean, they're probably joking, but do you think he'll actually sign that? I don't know. They're laughing, right? They assumed that he would not sign that.
Yeah, well, he
and
couldn't
then
sign
they say he didn't take our deal. How dare he? He owes us money, right? This is them laying obstacles, right? And every time Zelensky does something stupid and opens up his big mouth in an angry retort to these steps,
Trump's hit him.
This is Trump. They chuckle and take another step back.
Yeah.
This is a game. I think the Trump administration is very clearly, purposefully doing this. I think, of course, they knew that whatever mineral wealth that Ukraine has, first of all, is largely, the majority of it's already in Russian hands in East Ukraine. Second of all, it's blown out of proportions. Third of all, there's big questions about practicality and profitability of even mining it. Rare earths. Yeah. They're not actually that rare, right? First of all, it's hard to get. Second of all, they require immense destructive strip mining of entire swaths of earth, right? You literally have to filter tens of thousands of tons of earth it's like panning for gold. You're looking for those little tiny to accrue enough of these rare earths to make it profitable. So it's incredibly expensive, time consuming, and destructive, right? And there's no infrastructure at all for it, right? And if there's not, then there's the question, well, why hasn't it been done already? Why hasn't anyone done it? It's because that it would have required so much investment that no one saw that it was profitable until this point. And the Trump administration certainly knew that. They've been playing as Trump loves to toss this type of bone to his base, right? Yeah, we're in Syria for the oil, right? And the CIA is like, no, we're not. We're in there as a bulwark against Iran and against the United States, and to prevent the reconstruction of Syria sitting on their oil so the government can't have economic recovery and eventually collapse, which they did, right? But if Trump wants to publicly say, and that we're there for the oil, sure, whatever, right? Let him say that, right? He likes talking in that monetary colonial attitude to his base for whatever reason, and they eat it up. I think that's part of it, right? He's there. I'm gonna get your money back. I'm gonna get your money back. We're gonna get some hard. Oh my God, they refused my deal, right? How dare they, right? This is a pantomime. This is a performance being put on, and Zelensky is once again playing his part, and he's actually playing it better than he has, at least as far as the Trump administration is writing the script.
Well, speaking of Zelensky, so the reporting came out over the weekend that he said he'd leave for NATO membership. And I'm like, dude, you are just going to leave. Yeah, right. Or peace. That was the other thing. Peace or NATO membership. This is nonsense.
You give me NATO membership, which is not on the cards, whether I'm there or not, and I'll leave, right? I mean, that's rhetorical games, right? That's positioning. That has nothing to do with reality. He is not really offering you. This comes because there was a report in the New York Post, which has not been refuted by anyone in the Trump administration, right? But supposedly the New York Post, which seems to be Trump's go-to, leak source at the moment, right? Right, because that's the Republican rag versus the liberal New York Times, right? Anyway, so he went to the New York Post, says they have an anonymous Trump administration official saying that Zelensky should just leave Ukraine. He should go to France yesterday, right? Yep. I mean, he should be gone. He should get out of Dodge, right? And this is Zelensky's response to that, quite clearly, right?
Give me NATO and leave.
Yeah. Sure, I'll leave. Just give me NATO, right? That's and he is talking even longer. Like he's saying, I don't intend to remain in power for decades. He's going further and further into delusional emperor with no clothes fantasy land, right? Against all this pressure that's mounting on him, he is not getting smarter. He's moving further and further into his desperate, panicked, delusional fantasy world.